Welcome to the podcast Venture Capital in Scandinavia. My name is Esben, and I have worked in the venture space for the last 8 years, both as an investor and an operator. In this podcast, we will explore both trends, opportunities, and challenges from both the Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian ecosystems, and we'll focus on venture capital both from the investor side and from the companies who receive venture capital funding, and we will keep a strong focus on the Scandinavian countries.
Could you just talk me through, you decide that you want to go that route and raise funding. Where do you start?
The key to successful funding round is all in the preparation before you even start reaching out. Actually, you don't need to get 100 warm introductions from day number one. And the most important thing nowadays is that you don't reach out cold, or at least to the extent you can avoid it.
And do you also prioritize which funds you want to speak to first?
With the first 10 investors you talk to, they are only practice. Like, it's pure play training and practice. You want to see which questions they ask.
If you were to give a piece of advice to founders wanting to raise venture capital for the first time.
I often say to some founders that you should not underestimate the power of angels. We also have quite a lot of angels in Scaleup Finance. And I think it's there's two reasons angels are important. It's because they don't work.
Okay. With us today, we have Alexander Wulff. Alexander is the co-founder and CEO of the company Scaleup Finance. The company was founded in 2021 and has raised a total of approximately $18 million in venture capital. Welcome, Alexander.
Thank you, Esben. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Alexander, we know each other from studying together at CBS. Could you just give me a brief intro to who are you, and what has your journey been from CBS, where we met each other, until today?
Yeah, well, I usually say I've been a founder all my life. That's not totally true, but at least, from about that time we met at university, where, the first company I co-founded was actually with the two other guys, two guys we studied with, Mads and Peter. Did that company for 11 years and then started Scaleup 4 years ago. So hoping never to have to go into the corporate world.
And you've written 2 books as well, right? I remember you did one about getting good grades in high school that sold a lot of copies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you did another one, which I actually don't. You have to remind me of that one, because I just from checking background checking, you said that you've written 2 best-selling books. Which one is the other one?
I've actually, in the meantime, written a third one.
Ooh, impressive.
But the other one was about personal finances for young people. So we kind of continued the same concept we did with the first, which was, for our age, we just finalized high school. So it was about how to get good grades in high school in a hacky way. The other one was about being a young person, just buying your first, or like moving out from your parents. How do you actually get your personal finances sorted out?
Yeah, it makes sense. But it's very cool. And I remember you from school, Alex, of course, because we were friends, but also because you took that entrepreneurial journey. You wrote books while we were studying, and then the 3 of you actually started Abeo, which the company is called that you worked for before, I think while we were studying, right?
Yeah.
And then quite a different journey to the one you're having now. And as you know, that this podcast is focused on venture capital. So I'm very curious to hear, because you've raised a significant amount of capital. Could you just talk me through, you decide that you want to go that route and raise funding. Where do you start? Like what's you come in on a Monday morning and say, okay, let's start the funding process. What do you do?
Yeah, it's a funny process in many ways, because I think, I once read or heard somewhere that the most important job you have as a founder CEO is make sure you never run out of capital. So it's a very high impact kind of job to be doing. I think the way I think about fundraising is that it's kind of in 2 phases in a way. It's that, like, the first time you do it, where you don't know shit and you're just insecure about everything. And once you've done it the first time, it feels less stressful, because you know kind of the dynamics and you know how the process works. And to be honest, it's not a difficult process. A lot of the steps are pretty logical. It's just when you haven't done it before, then it's always, I think, many first-time founders, they find it to be a very stressful time, which luckily kind of disappears a bit. Not totally, but a little bit.
But could you talk me through some of those steps? Like, so you do what's the first step? Do you map out what kind of investors you're looking for? Do you have like a long list of investors, or do you start with the pitch deck, or like where do you start?
Yeah, normally I would say before you even start looking at which types of investors you want to reach out to and you want to get into your round, it's everything is about preparation. It's about really like the commercial data room. It's about making your narrative. Of course, there's a lot of things going into the data room, like the pitch deck, the most important thing. But the key to a successful funding round is all in the preparation before you even start reaching out. It's relatively easy to find lists of investors, what they typically invest in, and yada yada. But the first step is the preparation. Actually figuring out what is my narrative. What do we need to raise, and after that, of course, you go into a process where it's the executional part, reaching out and actually starting talking to investors. And the most important thing nowadays is that you don't reach out cold. Or at least to the extent you can avoid it. So really try to get warm intros from whoever you can get warm intros from.
Yeah. And how did you go about that? And this small note, there's a bit of construction work in the background, but unfortunately we don't have the power to tell them to stop working.
No, I just shouted out the window.
I don't think it would help much. But yeah, so how, I mean, were there any benefits? Abeo was a completely different company. Was there any sort of spillover from your time there, or was it just starting from zero in this kind of company?
There was actually really no spillover effects from Abeo, except that I knew the process because it was such a different company. It was like a deep tech construction company. So the investors we talked to back then were not really relevant here. But me and my other co-founders in Scaleup, we now have a very large network of other founders that we could really use, but also some of my other co-founders also had a pretty good investor network. So one thing that is also important, I think, is actually you don't need to get 100 warm introductions from day number one. I have found getting intros from some of the investors I talk to that might say, hey, this is not within our scope, or, you're a bit too early, or you're a bit too late, or whatever they say. I always say, hey, but like, do you know other funds that might be interesting? Because so many VCs talk together. And I remember, especially in one of the rounds, I talked to an investor that said, like, this is really cool what you're building, but you are like, we are a bit later stage investors, but I'm happy to do some intros because I know some funds that I think would be quite interested in this. And she made 10 intros on the back of that. And she was a pretty well-established VC. So you can just imagine if you were able to get, just one or a couple or 10 intros on the back of some of your conversations, then it's kind of, almost exponential. But, that kind of fuels the entire process.
And then if we go back to the very first round you raised, was that from angels or family or friends? Because I assume that you also got some intros maybe through some of that network, or?
It's we are a bit of a weird case in the sense that me and my two co-founders, Nikolai and Torbjørn, they are also serial entrepreneurs. We had all done some exits and had some capital, so we actually covered the entire pre-seed phase. So we invested the first $2 million until we raised the seed round. So in a sense, we didn't. We had some friends and family in there, but we didn't have professional investors before we actually went to the seed round.
Well, that's a good start. At least if the company is going well, then I hope you're not too diluted by now.
No, exactly. That's the advantage.
Okay, so you get to the first round, which was the seed round, then, and then you start reaching out to different people in your network and asking for intros, or how do you, like, just from a very practical point of view, imagine now you're back then and it's the first time doing this. It's do you pick a few and just say, hey, we really need to start here, and do you also prioritize which funds you want to speak to first? A little bit like I remember getting ready to interview for consulting. It was like take the ones you don't really want first, just practice, and then move on to the next ones. How did you go about that?
Like, it's one-to-one-ism. That's exactly how you want to go about it in fundraising too. So I like the very true story is that so I knew a founder because we were kind of we were in a co-working space with 6-7 other companies, meaning that, and that was really amazing because that meant that there was like 6 other CEOs, 6 other CTOs, 6 other CMOs. So we had a lot of internal sparring with each other and could piggyback on that. So I talked to a founder that had just raised around, I think 6 months prior to us going out. So he had a Google Sheet with, I think, 100 or 150 different investors that he talked to. And he just told me, just let me know which of these you want interest to. And then this is the first lesson, or like the first important thing going into fundraising. As you just said, don't pick the ones you really, really want to get into a round. Usually, if I talk to other founders, and they are like first-time founders, I always advise them to with the first 10 investors you talk to, they are only practice. Like it's pure play training and practice. You want to see which questions they ask. You might want to iterate on your pitch deck, change your narrative, whatever, depending on what kind of feedback you're getting. So the 10 first, they might not know it, but they are guinea pigs.
Do you remember if there was anything you came out of from those meetings thinking like, wow, this is something we really need to rethink, or typically around the story, I assume, but also, whether you're onto something. I guess you quickly sense whether this is, I mean, some cases I meet at least think they want to go the venture capital way. And then they start meeting the venture capital investors and they realize, maybe we are actually not a venture capital kind of deal, right? So, but yeah, was there anything you recall thinking, okay, we really need to change the story here?
Yeah, I can't remember. I have already forgotten what our first narrative was, but I got one advice once.
Actually, maybe Alex, do you want to one step back because we didn't do the intro to Scaleup Finance? Do you want to do? Now you have your chance to do the elevator pitch for hopefully all the people listening, so they can go in and buy your services.
Yeah, I can do it quickly. So when we started, we were really trying to, we're so frustrated by having this monster of a spreadsheet that we built up for like steering our financial management. And all of the founders we talked to, they also said like, we also have this crazy motherfucker of a spreadsheet. So we wanted to build out and are building out a strategic financial management platform that plugs into your accounting system, your expense management platform, whatever, where you have your different data. And to be more specific, maybe we are really focused on a platform that helps you with the reporting, budgeting, forecasting. We have some pretty crazy stuff up our sleeve that we are actually going to announce tomorrow, which is a new fully fledged AI CFO platform.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we are
VCs like that kind of stuff, right? Everything AI. So it's
Yeah. So but anyway, we are building out solutions for simply helping not only founders but also just SMEs in general with the financial management.
So, and the original question before I interrupted you and asked you to do this intro was, if you remember, was there anything about that story you came up with in the very beginning, and then you met investors, and then you're like, okay, it's actually something completely different that we need to focus on?
I'd like to start just a bit just taking a step back, because one of the first realizations I had when I started talking to VCs were, the first meeting you have with a VC is 30 minutes, and you have at least 10 minutes just for, chit chat and introductions, meaning you only have 15 to 20 minutes to actually pitch your company. And those 30 minutes is going to dictate whether or not that VC want to spend more time with you. So the first meeting is just so incredibly important. You need to be so sharp. And what I found to be so kind of it was new learning was when you jump into these first meetings, some of the VCs can be quite brutal. They're just asking hard questions. And sometimes you find yourself in a situation where it's but this is a very complex question, or it requires a pretty prolonged answer. But the problem is if you're not able to answer it pretty in a simple way that doesn't make them say, that was not a satisfactory answer, then you won't get on. And I talked to a VC where I said, it feels like you're when I talk to you guys in the first meeting, you're just trying to kill the dialogue. It just seems like you don't even want to spend time with me. And then he said, yeah, Alex, but we have a name for that. It's called key objection points. And it's because, we are screening so many companies. We don't want to waste time if you don't live up to like, we can't check the boxes. And for that reason, that's why I always use the first 10 pitches, the first 10 VC meetings to identify these very important key objection points. So I found that in our first round, I found out exactly what, I needed to be extremely sharp on. So instead of trying to, take it in the last part of the conversation, or maybe not even covering it at all, and it was them asking the questions, I actually took that part up almost in the beginning and kind of tried to really frame it in a good way where they couldn't come by the end and then kind of attack me on, you could say all startups have challenges on the journey ahead, and you really want to make sure that those challenges are not like unanswered when the VC leaves the meeting, that they feel like, okay, of course there will be some challenges ahead. You need to succeed with this, and this, but we believe that this startup and this founder will be able to do that.
Yeah, and I guess also just to show that, hey, we know this, we thought about this, right? I mean, I've met companies where you raise some of these questions and you see the question marks in their eyes and you start worrying that, have you not thought about this, right? So to bring it up front. And I guess you would share this pitch in advance, right? So they have the chance to look through this or,
So some founders I talk to, I feel like they have a misconception about the purpose of the pitch deck. I always say the only purpose of your pitch deck is to make sure you get the first meeting. It is you don't need to explain everything in the pitch deck. Like you only want when they open up that pitch deck, they say, "Oh, this looks pretty interesting." Of course they will have questions. There will be things that are not covered, but whenever I go into that first meeting, I almost never talk about what is in the pitch deck already, because I want to use this time to elaborate and expand. So I think it's only in, like, looking back, maybe 2% of cases where I've actually been sharing my screen and going through the pitch deck. I'm going directly into everything they will not find in the pitch deck to try to make the best use of my time. They have seen the pitch deck. From the pitch deck, unless you have made a very crappy pitch deck, they should understand the problem, the solution, the market, and stuff like that. So I don't want to repeat all of this.
So they interview you, of course, to figure out whether it's worthwhile doing an investment. How do you evaluate the other way? I mean, you've raised quite a bit of money, so obviously you've been fortunate enough to have a good case that they want to invest in. What has been important for you when you've met these investors? I assume someone who understands what and buys into the problem you're trying to solve. But like, what have been the key things when you've looked through and evaluate, like, who do we really want with us on this journey? And who don't we want with us?
Yeah. So there's probably two categories here. There's like the hard stuff, maybe like hard criteria, and then maybe more of the soft ones. The hard ones can be, do you think it's important for a company that they have some kind of, that they are located in some kind of specific geographical region? So we were very focused on getting a lead investor from London, the UK, because we knew it would be our next market and thought that would be pretty helpful. There can also be some other things. I remember we got a term sheet during one of the rounds where this investor wrote, and they didn't even want to lead it. It was just like a co-leading. They wanted to write into the investment agreement that they could force through an exit. I think it was within 6 years. And we're like, what the fuck? Like, look at HubSpot, look at Salesforce, look at a lot of the big Carta companies that are now the $1 billion unicorn companies. Most of them are not 5 or 6 or 7 years old. They are not only 10 plus years old, they are oftentimes 15 years plus old. So, there's things around that, but in the end, it's also a lot about chemistry. Like how much do you think that you will actually agree with this investor about the strategy? So that was, and that might even be not only a soft but a hard criteria, but it's just it's not something that will be written into the investment agreement. It's up to you to judge. Do you think that this investor actually buys truly into the strategy and will not come 1 year later and say, hey, I think we need to change a lot of stuff?
And I think that's a perfect sort of bridge to the next question. And like, going into this, what were your expectations for how active the investors would be? Like, did you actually look for active investors, or were you more looking for the capital and then some good connections? And then that will lead me to the next question, which is how has it been in practice? Because I mean, you will see a lot of investors talk about how active they are and all the skills they have, but then you also meet a lot of cases where they actually don't work very actively with investors.
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like it's a publicly known secret that all investors talk about how active they are. It's kind of a prisoner's dilemma. How can a VC differentiate from another VC? They come with capital. That's the most important thing, truly. It's like it is. And if any startup raises money from a VC expecting them to like, they are now going to give you the strategy and they are now going to tell you how to execute, well, you might as well just stop being a founder, because that's not how it works. You are the one leading the company. You are the one being in the trenches every single day. And if you need to ask your VCs for advice on how to run your company, I think like it's just wrong. I actually really enjoy the investors we have in Scaleup today, because I actually do feel they are adding strategically to the conversations, and they are talking to a lot of other startups, a lot of other funds, so they know kind of what is going on in the market, and I'm actually having pretty regular catch-ups with them. But again, it is not the decisive factor. You need to steer your company, and the other one is more like a little helping hand.
What has been, if you were to think of like one thing you've gotten from the investors you have that has been the most valuable beyond capital?
So now we're actually also coming back to maybe what are you looking for when you raise funds? This might be overlooked to some extent by some startups, but it's follow-on capabilities. So what have we gotten from some of our investors? Well, we have been looking for investors that are able and want to follow up in following rounds, but also that can actively help us get in contact with other funds that they might have been collaborating with on other deals. So it's both their follow-on capabilities, but also their capabilities in terms of actually making sure that future funding rounds will go more smooth, and you don't need to like reach out cold to a lot of new investors, but they can actually help bring in other funds that they work with.
And how would you evaluate that? Is that looking at past deals they've done, or?
It's conversations with the VCs. They give you their pitch, and then of course you ask them for like what other deals have you done and how do you work typically. So I wouldn't say there's a very kind of a specific method necessarily for figuring this out. It is a human it is human people we're talking about. So yeah.
Just maybe to double click on that, the follow-on capabilities, because it's of course fantastic to have that option. Also comes with the risk of like, if they're known to do follow-ons, then you need to make sure they do the follow-ons. Otherwise it sends a pretty bad signal. So how does that work in practice? Do you have a conversation about we need to reach these targets, then we are almost guaranteed a follow-on, or how do you, where do you start with that? Or do you have that conversation closer to when you need to raise the next round, or?
So one thing I do, I'm very, very active with our existing investors. So I send out a very elaborate report, investor update, every single month. I report on basically everything that is going on at the company, trying to condense it, of course, sharing all our KPIs and stuff like that. And I have found that to be hugely useful because it creates a lot of trust. I'm also open with whatever challenges we face. And, the good part about that is that you can then come back, maybe, like you in 1 month, you're saying, we just hit this challenge. And then 3 months later, we just solved it. So you're building up a good, a lot of trust, reputation. And then you cannot escape the fact that if you don't reach your targets, if you don't show traction, if there's no progress, of course, nobody wants to invest just because you've sent a nice investor update. So there's only one thing in this game that speaks its true language, and that's execution and results. Without that, raising funds either from external or internal investors will not happen.
That makes sense. And you So you have a fairly somewhat diverse group of investors, at least in terms of sort of geographical location. This podcast is mostly focused on Scandinavian venture capital. So, but you have investors from outside Scandinavia. Do you see, or have you found, not just from the current investors you have, but also the ones you've met, do you see any differences, or have you experienced any differences that you noted? In it could be just from conversations or from having them on board.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I don't feel like I'm very old. I just turned 35, but I did when I look back, I raised the first VC around 15 years ago, which when I look back, it's almost an entire life in this world. But back then, you could only pitch to kind of Danish investors if you were in Denmark, because everything was like in person, and then you needed to do it was called a roadshow. So then you could go to, I don't know, going to the US or something like that to meet people. But after COVID, everything has moved online, and it has really, really started this wave of, I think, what would you say? Globalizing the entire investment scene, because now you can raise funds from VCs all over the world, and VCs can basically invest in startups all over the world. So I think the differences are gradually getting smaller and smaller. But of course, if you look at the VCs in Scandinavia, how do they differ from let's say American investors or other? Is like their knowledge about the local market and raising money and for VCs investing in startups is really much about building relations. And a VC that wants to get into a hot deal, they need to build those relations and networks so they are able to spot a deal before it might land on Sequoia's desk or Andreessen Horowitz or something like that. So they definitely have I think their biggest kind of advantage and differentiator is that they have the network and they have the knowledge, which makes them and then I know from some of the Danish VC funds, I think their strategy is to try to become known for being able to pick the best VCs or the best startups out of Denmark, or like if we also just look at Scandinavia in general, and help them get on a track to get in like the big A funds from the US or from London or something like that, by also building up relations with some of the really nice tier A funds.
That makes sense. It was so early stage fund I worked in previously, but that was much of what we wanted to do, was to connect with all the international funds and then present them for these deals, so hopefully internationalize these companies. But you mentioned this having an investor in London, because London has been very important for Scaleup Finance. How is that? What did you get the help you needed? And if so, what kind of help? Is that connections to clients? Is it to new investors, partners? What?
Like, again, I have never raised funds from any VC fund thinking they would help me get customers or partners or anything like that. I think 98% of the value you find in a VC is the capital and the help in securing capital for the next rounds, and then helping shape the narrative, but also knowing exactly what is going on like in what VCs are looking for and stuff like that. So I wouldn't say we have of course you always get some intros and stuff like that might be actually getting some customers or partners, but compared to the core business, it's really not a needle mover.
Makes sense. If we go back to this Scandinavia, or maybe the Danish scene even better than all of Scandinavia, versus what you have met from outside Scandinavia. If you were to change one, or it could be several things about the venture scene or like the venture capital scene in Scandinavia, what would that be?
In Scandinavia specifically?
You can also do more. You could do on a global level, or like the venture capital model in general, but it would be interesting to hear if you have any of these geographical perspectives.
Well, if I could just start with the general picture, maybe. I do really find the process of raising funds, like the matchmaking between startups and VCs, to be fundamentally kind of, okay, maybe it's too hard to say broken, but it's really not optimal. I feel like it's just everybody wants what they can't have. It's almost just like in dating. So whether you like it or not, FOMO plays a big role. And sometimes, let's just say you are a startup, you can spend so much time, trying to get the first term sheet, and it just feels so weird getting that first term sheet. Then suddenly you have 5 other investors lining up. Hey, we also want to invest. Where, like, if you just look at it from a philosophical level, that, that's weird, right? That like, where's the substance? And like, are you looking at actually the vision of the company, what you truly believe to be the potential of this company? If what a lot of founders out there are experiencing, that is 90% of a fundraising process is just getting to the first term sheet. And once you get the first term sheet, I wouldn't say it's a slam dunk and it's you over the finish line. But I once did talk to some people in some of my colleagues, and I said, and I tried to draw like this mental picture of a graph where I said, like, you're undersubscribed for the first 90% of the fundraising process, and then suddenly you get a term sheet, and like maybe you subscribe, but the curve just doesn't stop. Like, then it just goes up into oversubscribe. And that's the last 10%. And I just come back to the same conclusion. It kind of shows that there's so many like illogical kind of things happening. Like, just because, who is to say it's not a perfect science? Like, that's probably what we come down to. It's not a perfect science. So, but I've just seen so many times that these kind of human dynamics, FOMO, whatever, plays a pretty big role. And I just think that we might have startups out there that fail to raise funds, that actually have a pretty good business case, but they might never get to that first term sheet.
And I have, just to add on that, I've had the same experience. It's very much this herd mentality.
Yeah,
and
herd mentality.
I have a few stories. I won't tell all of them, but one was a company they met with a lot of local investors. The local investors, they weren't really interested. Not really replying. Got the cold shoulder, as you would say. And then they were bold and they reached out internationally, and Sequoia was interested.
Yeah.
And I remember the founder telling me, then the tables turned quite quickly, and it must have felt so good to sit there on the other end, and all of a sudden the funds that could barely, reply to your email, they're almost banging on your door physically to try to get in on this deal. And I think you're right, or you're absolutely right. There, of course, now we are just generalizing. There are many funds that actually do the work. But I guess it's also something to do with they see so many deals. So they're looking for these signals, right? Trying to figure out, like, I can't do a full private equity type due diligence on every deal I see. So I'm just trying to see, like, is there anything that validates this? Are they previous founders? Do they already have good angel investors? Have anyone else already signed a term sheet? Because they, and as you also alluded to earlier, like in these intro meetings, it's all often someone fairly junior, and their role is just to make sure that they don't miss the hottest deals, right? So they will just be looking for those. But I think you're very right, and I've tried to fundraise both when we were oversubscribed, and it was a lot of fun. I also tried the other way around, but the only goal was just to get that term sheet. To try to get, and I remember getting the advice, just get the first term sheet. Almost doesn't matter who it's from, just get someone to commit.
Yeah, that is as true as spoken. If there was something I wanted to change, it was that, to kind of make this process a bit more about like the actual company and a little less about everything going on around it. And, a lot of other people are interested or something like that. But I think it's a lost cause, to be honest, because I think it is just like fighting gravity. We are human beings, and it's not a perfect science, and that's probably just how it is. But
obviously you managed to play that game quite well, since you've raised quite a bit of money. And that also takes me back to the question, why did you decide to go this venture capital round? What is why did that make the most sense for Scaleup Finance versus, trying to make money Not that you're not trying to make money, but don't get me wrong, like that you're funding the company with venture capital.
Yeah, so when we started Scaleup, we had and still have an extremely bold vision, which is to become one of the biggest fintechs the world have ever seen. So when we entered, now what I usually say is that we have one big competitor, one extremely big competitor, but it's not what you would typically consider a competitor. It's called Excel. Like when I just, try to make a visual image of how do I think financial management is going to look like in 10 years, I have absolutely no doubts that there will be a software platform, a financial management software platform that will have replaced Excel simply because it is, software can do many things smarter than these like manual spreadsheets. And I think this is going to be an enormous market. When I look at history, I think there's two great examples of, you could say, categories that have been established on the backbone of what was previously very spreadsheet driven. The first one is ERP systems, accounting systems. There's a reason bookkeepers are being called bookkeepers, like they actually had real books before they then went into spreadsheet. Sorry, I think they're drilling out there now.
They had a break for like 30 minutes and now they're back to work. So that's nice.
And then the other space is CRM. I remember one of the guys in our sales department who has been working, I think, within sales for 15 years. He said, like back when he started, he had a phone book and like a physical notebook, and he was tracking all deals and conversations and both like actually writing it down. Sorry. And then he went to a spreadsheet, and then you see like Salesforce and HubSpot and whatnot. And when you actually look at those two spaces, so the category leader within ERP is SAP. They are I think the 50th biggest company in the world, measured on market cap. The category leader of the CRM space is Salesforce. They are the 30th biggest company in the world. So I think that this space that we're entering right now, which is 99% Excel dominated, will in 10 years have whatever the space is going to be called like a category leader that will be on the top 100 list. So if you have that thesis and you have a vision to solve that, then speed to market is important to become the category leader. And that's why we from day number one was like, this is a venture case. We need to get this kicked over the ramp.
You're now in Denmark and in the UK, right?
Mm. And very shortly we will be expanding into a lot of other territories with this new very, very crazy product we are going to ship.
Exciting. I'm very I'm curious to see when this comes out, Alex. You said tomorrow. Then I guess when it's tomorrow, it depends on when we launch this podcast. But we plan to launch this very soon, so that's good.
Okay, and then it might already, or it should already have been released.
Yeah. If you were to give a piece of advice to founders, don't have to be young founders, but just to founders out there, wanting to raise venture capital for the first time. They decided this is the route we need to go. It's the best thing for our company. Hopefully not just because they think it's cool to have venture backing, but because it actually makes sense. Because you also have some of those who just thinks it's cool. What would be your advice to them? Like, to now you talked about the preparation is key, getting that first term sheet, figuring out who are the right investors, what you want from it. Also, how much you need to raise. What would be sort of your most important advice?
Yeah, like you actually just mentioned one of the like key aspects: preparation. Just maybe expanding a bit on it. I did try one round not too recently where I was a bit too unprepared when we went into it, and there were some like documents I should have prepared in advance that they asked for. And you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you actually have an investor pretty interested, and then they say, hey, can you send me your go-to-market deck? Or can you send me your whatever? It's something that, like, it's a hygiene factor you need to have in place. So I needed to do like an all-nighter to produce some stuff there, because you don't want to, it cannot take 72 hours or 4 days or 5 days or something like that before you return material to an investor that is interested. You look unprepared, looks unprofessional, you need to be able to return it within max 24 hours. Otherwise, it looks like, just like me, that you actually had to sit down and do it. And then it's kind of you almost signal to that investor, hey, I'm not talking to others, because if they are the first one to ask for this document, you should have, right? Then you come across as unprofessional. But maybe taking a step back, I also think you mentioned something quite interesting in terms of angels and are you a VC case at all? I often say to some founders that you should not underestimate the power of angels. We also have quite a lot of angels in Scaleup Finance, and I think it's there's two reasons angels are important. It's because they don't work necessarily with the same kind of criteria as a VC fund, where they need to return, where they need to get their money back at least 10 times. They are much more just looking at the company and think, can this be a good business? Can I make some money? Then, I'd be happy to do it. And a lot of angels do actually also work together with VCs. So I have in a lot of rounds actively it has been working pretty well for us to have some angels that also gave some, kind of a blue stamp that they wanted to invest and they had committed to the round. And in the pre-seed stages, you might actually only be raising from angels and before you then go on the VC track, if you even want to go on the VC track. Because in my first company, Abeo, we raised VC money and we were not a VC case. And it ended, luckily, we ended up in a good place, but we went through the fucking whole roller coaster. So 6 years after we started, we had actually shown a lot of traction and results, but I also think and we actually got term sheets for our next round. A lot of stuff happened, and I don't want to go into the details, but 2 weeks before the money was supposed to go into the bank account, they pulled the term sheets, and our board had only one option, that was to declare the company bankrupt. So me and my co-founder, we were just sitting there. It was Peter, we were just sitting there. I almost started to write my resume and think, fuck, now I need to go into corporate. And we're like, no, we are not going to accept this. We are going to persist. We are going to do it. Let's find some private money. And we found an industrial player that, actually was also the first customer in the company. So we made a bid for the bankruptcy estate. And I think 1 or 2 weeks after having gone bankrupt, suddenly we had the company again. No debt, no VCs, and I think almost more than five-folded my equity, because we had all been totally diluted. Now with an industrial player, and that's where the company actually really started to take off. And that was a bittersweet kind of learning. It ended in a good state. But, it could equally well had ended there with that bankruptcy had we not, tried to build up the company in this kind of very VC-driven way. So I think it is a question a lot of founders need to ask themselves, and a safe way to do it is actually to really explore alternative options like angel investors. And angel investors come in many different shapes and forms. Some invest relatively small amounts, but there's also angel investors that are very active, and they invest money that can be the foundation for actually running your company. And maybe you never need to go out and raise VC money later on.
Yeah, but it obviously makes a lot of sense. And I guess my learning, and also from really enjoying this space, is that there are many people who enjoy this space, and there are people who start companies where they should probably stop and think about whether it really is the right path to go from a business perspective versus what kind of profile you want to have or what you find interesting to work with. Seen a few of those, especially in recent years, as also the funding market has not dried up, but at least gone down from the heydays. So I think you've seen probably more of that in the recent years. But with that, Alex, time flies when you're having fun, and luckily the construction workers they took a lot of breaks, so it didn't disturb us too much. Thank you so much for taking the time, and super interesting to hear about your personal journey, but also your journey with the Abeo. I remember that from all the years we've known each other, and now to Scaleup Finance.
Yeah, thank you, Esben. It was a pleasure, and great to see you again. Hope to see you again sometime soon. We met also last time at where was it? Was it at
Barbecue? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I did press record. I'm good. I think they tried. So we have another podcast as well, more focused on talent. And I think one was the first episode they recorded. They realized like 40 minutes in that they didn't press record. So I don't want to make that mistake.
Yes,
Okay.
like last Christmas, I chose to record personal videos to every single person in Scaleup. After video number 20, the guy who was helping me out, we realized that there was no sound on any of the first one, and I'd spent 3 hours.
And then having to go back and